The Sunset Strip Diaries, Chapter 5, The Mental Ward. In January of 1989, my mother wrote me a letter that pissed me off, but it also kind of relieved me. It said that we were moving away from our neighborhood because she knew I was in trouble with a bad crowd. What really happened was that our house was in foreclosure because my dad hadn't paid the mortgage in months. Luckily, my mom ended up being able to sell the thing at the last minute. Anyway, she didn't mention that. She stuck to her story that we were moving because of me. And hell, I did need to get out of that neighborhood and away from my new crowd. She said that Jeff Hunter came to her and told her I was in trouble with some older guys. I was pissed at him for butting in. He was only an afterthought to me at that time, even though he was my world 6 months prior. I think I told him my happenings in passing, but I didn't want to deal with his angry girlfriend if we were caught speaking to one another. I was mad at him for telling her about me because she still yelled, "Whore!" at me anytime she saw me at school, no matter where we were or how many people were around. And it hurt more once I wasn't a virgin because I did feel like a whore and she was basically rubbing it in. It felt like I was living on one little AAA battery instead of the usual 4D batteries. When in my room, I screamed at the top of my lungs and laid my ear against my stereo speakers that were on full blast. I kept having dreams about demons and devils and evil things. I started drifting in and out of hallucinations. Then I stopped grooming. I stopped the skimpy clothes and started wearing men's t-shirts. I wouldn't brush my hair, wear shoes, or even turn my shirts right side out. I went to school with inside-out shirts that were backwards, with the tags sticking out in front, under my chin. I lost the will to live, so it didn't really matter what I looked like. I still possessed enough vanity to wear makeup, though. I felt as if my being pretty was the only power I held. But as for the rest of me, I pretty much looked homeless. The kids at school left me alone, except for the random gangster girls bust in from South Central L.A., who shouted at me and called me a crazy, barefooted bitch. The Latin cholas left me alone, raising their perfectly penciled-in eyebrows and just shaking their heads. I was so tired and depressed and suicidal, I really just was not scared of anybody at that point. I probably would have beaten the shit out of or tried to kill any one of them who stepped to me. People stayed away. Even Jeff's hateful girlfriend shut up after a certain point. My mom made a plan to move us all into our grandmother's house. We had nowhere else to go. When everything was packed and being moved, my sister and I had our belongings in these little train cases. Mine was covered in stickers on the inside, and it held my favorite cassette tapes, some makeup, rocker jewelry, and little knickknacks that made me happy that were left over from those garbage bags. It was a tiny little piece of luggage, but it had my life inside. Well, what was left of it anyway. We moved in with my grandmother that February. She still lived in a small house in Canoga Park, which was the house where my mother grew up. I normally loved and felt comforted by the house, but this time it felt dark and sad. Canoga Park was not a bad neighborhood in the 1950s, or even in the early 1980s, but by 1989, the homes in that particular neighborhood had a lot of security bars on the windows, and the surrounding area had become infested with, well, let's just say, unsavory people. The neighborhood was not as safe as the one we had just left. I got my mother's childhood room, and my sister got what was left of the TV room, and Aunt Billy's room before that. My mother ended up sharing a room with her mother. When I opened my closet, I saw 1950s nursery wallpaper with lambs and ribbons on it. It was pretty, but my taping pictures of LA guns all over it soon destroyed it. My bedroom floor became quickly covered in clothes and shoes, and the bathroom was soon full of wet towels. And within a month or two, the kitchen had roaches that scattered when a light was turned on. We were just slobs, and my poor grandmother said nothing. One day I started scratching my private parts, and I could not stop. I laid in my bed and cried because it hurt so badly. There was no downtime, and it felt like somebody had my skin in a vice grip, and it was pinching me as hard as they could for hours and hours. My eyes watered, and my teeth clenched. I was taken to a doctor at some point, and the mystery was solved. I had a horrible, horrible case of VD. It hurt pretty much worse than anything I've ever been through. They put me on some big horse pill painkillers and tried getting rid of it, but it became so painful I had to go to the emergency room. I was referred to a doctor who I could not stand. One time he was trying to treat me with a Q-tip of acid, and he accidentally spilled the entire bottle between my legs into my butt crack. I screamed in pain. It burned me so terribly that big pieces of my skin were falling off in clumps when I got home. I think the thing I hated most about him, though, was the fact that he constantly told me I was pretty and always wanted to examine my 15-year-old breasts. But instead of having me lie down and put an arm behind my head as he felt in a circular motion, the proper way to do a breast exam, he had me stand up against the door, closed door, as he lifted up my shirt. It was just a man squeezing my boobs and getting off on it. I knew it wasn't right and I really wanted to scream, but I was just really defeated and I was really exhausted. Who was there to tell? I actually did tell my mother once, but she thought I was being dramatic and she ignored me. I even brought it back up to her a few years later and I told her it was still kind of bothering me that he was a practicing doctor. This was another scenario where I wanted her to cock a rifle on a mountaintop and vow to shoot the nuts off anyone who touched her child in a sexual manner. Instead, she told me to write a letter to his higher-ups and went along with her day. A few years later, I actually did write a letter to the American Medical Association, and I never received a response. I even went back into the doctor's office by myself after I could drive to try and complain. And at that point, they told me he no longer worked there. You would think he got in trouble, but guess what he does now? He has his own practice in Encino. He is an infertility doctor. He probably suggests he screw people's wives to see if there are any problems. Well, needless to say, I was pretty unhappy with my life and health problems there in 1989. I didn't know how to deal with my pain and anger, and I started hurting myself, beating myself in the face, hitting myself with things, and sometimes asking other people to hurt me. I now know that self-injury is kind of like a coping mechanism, but back then I just felt really grotesque inside, and I felt I deserved abuse. I really just had a lot of self-hatred. Guys picked me up and tossed me across the room like a lifeless corpse, and I hit the ground in pain, but I somehow felt relieved. And other times I tried to strangle myself, but I couldn't do it. I still was too chicken to actually kill myself, but I had no desire to continue my life, so I lived as if I were not alive. I lost all hope for myself, never thought of the future, did not think I would make it that far. I never, ever considered I would live to be in my 30s. I thought I would either die that year or within the next few years, and I really just didn't care. It did not scare me. I didn't fear death for the first time. I even prayed for death sometimes. I cried and begged God, please just kill me. I just want to go. Too many things had happened at once. Sorry, guys. I was in a lot of trouble and I couldn't seem to get myself under control. And I knew I got myself into each mess. I knew I chose to dress and behave the way I did, and I really knew that I had nobody to blame but myself, in all honesty. I stayed at my grandmother's house with my mother and sister for another 3 years, but we all avoided each other, and we were not a family. My mother and I especially hated each other. No one should treat the parent the way I treated her. I was really horrible toward her, but it was because I was hurt inside. And she told me that the only reason I was still living with her was because I was a minor and it was the law. And as soon as I turned 18, I would be toast. Instead of telling her it hurt me that she seemed to have given up on me, I decided to be a raging bitch to her instead. My sister and I really didn't get along too well either, but I don't remember hating her. I just remember there were good times and bad. I don't ever recall consoling her through her own troubles. I was too selfish. We all handled it in our own way. My mom shut down, I acted out and was wild, vocal, and angry, and my sister escaped to the homes of her friends who had more normal lives. My sister says, I remember hearing Mom locked in the bedroom, just screaming, screaming, screaming. I thought she was going to kill herself. You don't scream like that unless you want to die. I tried to knock on the door and help her, but it was locked. She told me later she was going to kill herself. She had a lot on her plate at that time, and I was not on that plate. She stopped raising me. Back to me. My dad became a transient, living off other people's generosity. He was not cut out to be a father, the head of a family. He just was not cut out to follow the rules. Maybe he was cut out to, but he refused to. I never really found out. Just like his hippie days before we were born, he lived off the land, his favorite thing to do. He was always running from the law, the IRS, the government in general. Oh, and the Hells Angels were also after him for some reason. He felt a horrible guilt for not being a father to us, but he couldn't or wouldn't make it up to us. One thing I did not like about living in Canoga Park was that I had to wake up at 4 a.m. to go to school back in our old neighborhood. I was given the option to transfer somewhere closer to my grandmother's house, but I chose to finish out my high school years at the school I was already attending. I did not want to start over somewhere else. I had just gotten used to my school's layout, and I felt I was dealing with the kids' reaction of me better than I had when I first got there. I didn't want to have that nightmare all over again with a new set of kids. My mother made an arrangement with our former neighbors, the Lauderdales, who agreed to take me in 3 hours before school started each day. I slept in a leather chair on their dark, heavily draped, tobacco-scented living room for 2 hours. Then at 7 a.m. they woke me as they left the house to go to their jobs, and I walked to school and spent another hour hanging out with the smokers at the Wall before school started. I didn't mind the mornings, though. The bad part was after school when I had to take public transportation home. It took me an hour. I got on the RTD bus and I took it down one of the big main streets. Then I had to wait 20 minutes or so for the next bus, which took me to a street that was a block from my grandmother's house. Waiting for the public bus to arrive was sheer misery, especially when it was either 90 degrees outside and I was dripping sweat in the direct sun, or it was freezing and I didn't have warm enough clothes. I know I sound like one of those parents that had to walk to school in the snow 5 miles, but woe's me, guys. There was always some crazy fat man in a stained shirt yelling at an imaginary person, or guys who looked like serial killers rubbing their crotches against me when the bus was crowded and we had to stand. That was the worst. I had to shove several men for doing that. I was about to write that it was scary, but I was pretty tough. It really did not scare me. If I would have had a knife on me, I really would have sunk it into one of them with no problem at all. I remember always being starving and have to sit on a bus bench in front of a Subway sandwich shop where I could smell fresh bread baking. No matter that their bread always really smells better than it actually tastes. It smelled really good and it was kind of torturous, and I really just wanted to hold up the store and steal a tray of the bread and just eat it right there at the bus stop like a ravenous maniac. The second I got home, I dropped my books. I went straight to the kitchen to make myself my favorite dish, rice-a-roni, either chicken or beef flavor. The sodium content was in the quadruple digits, but who cared? That shit was delicious. Sometimes I watched Married with Children on TV later in the evening, but the hit shows of the time did not really interest me. 21 Jump Street, The Tracy Ullman Show, It's Gary Shandling's Show, Cops. I recall going to see the movie Heathers with Karen, but other than that, I didn't really do much. I spent most of my time listening to music, and not the popular music of the day, which would have been Albie Sure, Paula Abdul's Forever Your Girl album, Milli Vanilli, Bobby Brown, or New Kids on the Block. I did like Nina Cherry's Buffalo Stance, but that was about it. I could barely stomach the rock bands of the time like the Bullet Boys, Warrant, and Winger. I mostly listened to my Faster Pussycat and LA Guns tapes. Faster Pussycat, who I had been introduced to through the Metal Years movie, wore lots of scarves and a little makeup and hairspray. Despite the fact that they were uglier than a monkey's asshole, their songs were catchy and upbeat, and I thought they were putting me in a better mood. LA Guns were pretty hard-looking. They wore black leather pants and had black hair, black eyeliner, and lots of tattoos. They were not cutesy. I felt they most represented me. I found their look attractive, and their music was my favorite. I can listen to it for hours without getting tired of it. I saw a band in my rock magazines named Demals, and I thought the singer was cute, so I got their tape. That is literally how I picked bands at the time. Well, at all times. Demals were definitely designed for girls out of the Poison template. Bubblegum music, lots of color, hairspray and lipstick, looked like trannies. I ended up liking their music despite the fact that they seemed to know only one chord on the guitar. They sang about Hollywood and girls gone bad and all of the usual stuff. I didn't need deep, depressing Metallica sort of music about guys losing their limbs during wars. I wanted something light and carefree, and I got it. For a few months, I was relieved to be away from my old house because Casey and his friends could not find me. No one knew where I lived. No one had my phone number. I had a chance to have a clean slate and escape the bad crowd I had entered. But then I grew bored. I know, I was an idiot. There were two guys in Casey's crowd who were a little more clean-cut than the heroin addicts and such. They were identical twins named Fritz and Andy. They weren't dirty, they weren't druggies, they still lived at home with their mother, and they still went to high school. But they were only 2 years older than me, unlike the other guys who were 4 or 5 years older. These boys were tall, rich, and spoiled. They had inheritances coming to them when they turned 21 because their grandfather invented some important sort of shit. They lived relatively close to me, but in a nicer area, so I called them and gave them my new number. I convinced my mother they were harmless, so she let me see them. Andy had shoulder-length dark hair flipped over to one side. He was very soft-spoken, calm, polite, and somewhat feminine. I would not bat an eyelash if I heard that he was gay today. Fritz was more masculine, not to mention friendly and outgoing. His hair was bleached blonde. He kind of resembled Anthony Kiedis from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was not afraid to get into a fight. Andy was a big old queen, but I was in love with him because he was so sweet to me. Fritz was just plain hot, and I could not decide who I liked better. They dragged me around with them to their get-togethers and parties, and while they were not as big of assholes as the older guys with whom I had been partying, they still were teenage guys, and they tried getting down my pants every chance they got. There was a point when they started to get into a competition over me. One of them would call and pick me up, and I would go hang out with him. When that brother went to pick up more beer or answer the phone or leave the scene at all, the other brother always snuck over to me and persuaded me to leave with him. And I always did. I did not have any sense of loyalty to either of them. I was easily persuaded and loved the attention, even though I highly doubt their competition had anything to do with me. It was clearly between them and their own egos. One day Andy grilled me on what music I liked. I tried to pick something that I thought would go over well, something universal, so I told him Guns N' Roses. He rolled his eyes and said they were too hesher. He liked bands like Hanoi Rocks. Hanoi who? I thought. Then I remembered briefly reading about Hanoi Rocks in Circus, when it covered Vince Neil of Motley Crue accidentally killing Hanoi's drummer in a drunk driving accident. Andy showed me a poster he had bought. It said Self-Destruction Blues, and it had a picture of Hanoi's platinum blonde frontman, Michael Monroe, exaggerating a wink. He was deeply tanned and had bright blue eyes and teased hair. So this is what was cool? Not being too mainstream, liking things that were a little more obscure. Well, that made sense. It surely was more Hollywood to have eclectic musical taste. I would have to check them out. Within the next few weeks, I went to the music shop down the street, and I looked through some Hanoi Rocks tapes and records. I noted that they dressed in vests, hats, glittery sashes, scarves, and tight pants. They wore makeup, they had hairsprayed hair. That part was all fine and dandy. It was their music that was totally bizarre. I randomly picked Back to Mystery City out of the albums that were available. When I got it home, I listened to it, and I was disturbed. The song Mental Beat put me in a bad place in my head, and Malibu Beach Nightmare reminded me of that awful night on the beach with Jamie. But if Hanoi Rocks were obscure, underground, and cool, then I was convinced I had to start memorizing some songs. I wanted to nonchalantly start singing a tune around someone cool and have him or her say, "Hey, you know that song?" This actually did happen at some point. In all fairness, I eventually got the rest of their music as the years went by and fell in love with quite a bit of it, but at that time, I was just being a poser straight up. As my 10th grade year came to an end, I started to feel a little bit better. I hung around my school friend Abby a lot more. She was very tough and mean to many people, but she was nice to me. She could be sarcastic and she could be cynical, but I really treasured her. She had been through some abuse in her life, most recently a very brutal rape in Hollywood where she had been a runaway. We both had been through hard times, so finding each other was a blessing. I got a little more confidence just having a friend to confide in. We even started to have fun. We both started to lighten up. We even started laughing and giggling and being regular girls. I got a second wind that summer and created a new look for myself. It wasn't too drastically different, it was just more creative. I dyed my hair bright purple, and I colored my eyebrows with a dark purple eyeshadow that was perfectly matched to the tone of my hair. While the other girls wore their hair permed and teased, I wore mine ironed perfectly straight and long. I did this with a clothes iron on an ironing board. My new signature look was purple, turquoise blue, and black and white polka dots. I had blue nails most of the time, and I wore loads of silver bracelets. I had a turquoise blue shirt that stopped just under my chest, and turquoise short shorts that I wore with lace-up Grecian sandals. I had a skin-tight purple spandex skirt that stopped just under my behind, which I wore with a white top with black polka dots. All of my outfits were from Contempo Casuals, which I thought was comparable to Christian Dior or something. I thought that shit was haute couture. I was proud of my outfits. I had a long, sheer black scarf with white polka dots on it that I tried to wear as a headband, but it always fell out. I loved that sash. I also wore this drugstore perfume that came in a round white bottle with a black exclamation mark sticking straight out of it. I didn't care that I smelled like a 1970s douche. I liked that bottle. Any birthday or holiday money I received from faraway relatives usually went toward that perfume. The summer of 1989 was all about the new movie, Batman, with Michael Keaton, Kim Basinger, and Jack Nicholson as the Joker. It was Batman everything. Shirts, cups, stickers, Happy Meals. Disney's The Little Mermaid also came out that year, along with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Say Anything, and Steel Magnolias. I had to attend summer school to make up my failing grades, so I took biology with a bunch of kids who were younger than I. I brought a 1.5-inch little plastic brown cow to class every day, and it sat on my desk. I called it, How Now Brown Cow. I was trying to get attention, and I got a lot of it. All the younger boys in the class called me a witch and drew cartoons about me, but I really didn't care. I told them to watch out or I'd put a hex on their asses. I became popular in the class, although it was more likely just infamous. One day, the biology teacher decided to show a very boring movie, so I thought it would be perfectly logical to crawl out of the class on my hands and knees, in short shorts at that. As I was doing so, I looked up toward the class across the hall, and I saw a delicate boy with fluffy blonde hair and small features watching me. He approached me later on in passing and introduced himself as Justin Sandstrom. I knew immediately that I could not date him because I felt his innocence and his big heart. I knew I was too internally warped and was not capable of having a regular relationship with some nice boy my age. He was polite and sweet, and he lived with his parents, probably the kindest person I had ever randomly met. He acted as if I were some goddess, and I felt very flattered. He said, I didn't know girls like you actually existed. Well, I gave him my number to pump up my ego initially, but we ended up becoming very close friends after I explained why I could not date him. I told him all of my secrets, and he told me about his life, which was not completely innocent. He told me about how he was turned off by girls who came on really strong. He told me stories about sleeping with his ex-girlfriend when her parents weren't home, going to dances, all the stuff he did with the girls he dated. He always tried to tell me I was very special and I deserved better than the guys I dated, but I really just could not comprehend that. I felt destroyed inside, and I just did not see an end to that, so I was trying to accept it and move forward. I turned 16 that September. I was feeling much better about my life. I was going into the 11th grade. I was excited to take driver's education and learn how to drive. I signed up for the stage crew for the school plays. I had Abby as my friend at school. I had Justin to talk to on the phone every night, and I did not feel so alone. My hair was brilliant purple, and I loved it. I thought things were finally looking up, but that was not to last. My dad, who we hadn't seen for nearly a year, suddenly started showing up around my grandmother's house. He snuck into the shed in the backyard and slept there a few nights, watching us through the kitchen windows when it was dark. He hid in the bushes and watched us go to school in the morning, and one night he knocked on a window and it scared me because I couldn't see outside in the dark. I opened the window, saw it was him, and promptly told him to get the fuck out of my yard or I'd call the cops on him for trespassing. My sister and I were both very confused. Some nights she thought she might want to see him. Other nights she didn't. We tried to respect that one of us might feel one way and the other another way at any given time. We didn't know what we thought. It put us into a tailspin mentally. We just acted out in different ways. She started shoplifting and having crying spells in school. I became very angry and full of rage again, and I just wanted to run away. I let my dad in the house on one of those nights. He crawled in on his hands and knees crying. He told me he saw God in the street when he was on acid. He started pouring out all of these disturbing things. It was very hard on me and really did a number on my mind. He was clearly in a lot of pain. He kept telling me he didn't want to live. I was like, does anyone in my family want to live? He was full of regret, and he apologized 1,000 times, begging forgiveness. He knew he made a mistake and ruined the family. He said he would do whatever it took to make it up to us and that he loved us. My sister and I did feel bad for him. It was really hard to see him in that state. The former head of our family so vulnerable. It really left me raw, thinking that there was really nobody in charge of us. My mom was still a walking corpse and could barely talk. I just was scared. Seeing him in that state was a lot worse than not having him at all. I really regretted letting him in the house that night. I realized I just wanted him to leave me alone so I could heal. But he was relentless in wanting to talk to me and make things right. I got up and walked out of the house while he was in mid-speech, without my contact lenses on. I couldn't see anything, and to make it worse, it was dark out. I didn't care. I just kept walking. Tears filled my eyes, and my heart just overflowed with pain. He started following me down the street and tried talking to me. He said, "Hey, we could live together. We can get a place together." I said, No. I'm running away to Hollywood." I started walking faster in the dark, and I saw blurry streetlights through my tears. I just wanted him to leave me alone, and he really just wouldn't. So I suddenly got this rush of adrenaline and thought, you know what? This is it. I'm going for it. I ran straight into traffic on a busy street. And I somehow did not get hit. My dad ran out, grabbed me, pulled me back to the sidewalk while horns were blaring and cars were screeching. I got out of his grip, turned around, and tried going a different way in the dark, and I finally just collapsed onto somebody's front lawn and started bawling in the dark. He sat down next to me. I started yelling at him. I told him the horrible things I had let happen to me because I had no respect for myself, because I thought I was only good for one thing. I told him that is what he taught me. I yelled it in his face. The things that were coming out of my mouth were kind of shocking to me, but I couldn't stop. He screamed really loud when I said that, and he started crying really hard. It was really horrible to hear a man cry, and the next thing I knew, a bunch of tiny kittens came out of the bushes and started crawling all over us and meowing. It was really surreal, and I thought I was having a really bad dream. He came by a few weeks later, and I really just couldn't look at him. He apologized to me, saying cocaine was a very sexual drug. I knew inside he was talking about something filthy. I couldn't bear thinking of what he was getting at. I couldn't think about what he was apologizing for, even though I had made reference to it when I was screaming at him. I made my mind not think about it. I was picking at my big purple candle and just wishing he would leave. I let him ramble on. I didn't answer him, and I remember feeling like I used to feel when my mother would force me to listen to a sex talk learning about menstruation or something. It was really uncomfortable. No eye contact, picking at something, not responding, praying he would hurry up and finish his speech. I kept telling myself, it didn't happen, don't think about it. I heard a song around then that always made me cry because it struck something really weird in me. Janie's Got a Gun by Aerosmith. It was about a girl who killed her father because he had abused her. I often had that same fantasy. Although I felt sorry for him on some days, most days I really loathed him and I really did want him dead. I was deeply hurt and angered by him. I could have killed him myself. I shopped around through some of my rougher guy friends to see how much putting a hit on him would cost. I found out somebody would do it for $5,000. I did not have that kind of money. I really wish he would stop coming to my house and disrupting my life, so I could have a chance at being happy. I started to get a lot of anxiety for the next couple of months, and by the time that Christmas came, I was back in a depression. Christmas, a time I adored, would not be the same this year. My family was broken apart. We were living at my grandmother's. Most of my belongings were gone, and the yuckiest thing of all was that my father gave a half-assed admission to molesting me. It absolutely broke apart my soul. Ugh. At the time, I told myself I was depressed over a guy or something. I think it was Andy. Please. I saw the commercial for the Rudolph Claymation special that they showed on TV every December. The next day at school, I felt this stinging pain, like a heartbreak. I missed watching cartoon TV specials with my sister. I missed being a child. I didn't want to be a teenager. I didn't want to be in all of the situations I got myself into. I wanted my old dad back, the one who played church hymns on his guitar and brought me Beach Boys records. I wanted both my parents to be normal and still married. What happened to my dad? Will my mother ever look me in the eyes again? What happened to them? I was going down some stairs at school between classes when my mind started to go. I sat down on a step and put my head in my hands. People walked around me. I started blacking out. My fists clenched, my nails were making marks on my palms. My eyes were crushed shut. My mouth was open, nothing was coming out. A girl I hated from PE asked me if I were okay. She was the only one who did. The next thing I do, I was screaming and crying at the top of my lungs, running through the halls. I couldn't control it. I did not know where it was coming from. And I remember seeing a kid I knew from grade school stare at me in fright. I don't know how much time lapsed, but I remember being in a different spot when a bunch of security guards came up in a group to restrain me. I was kicking, screaming at them. They could not get me under control. Or maybe they were trying to be gentle with me and were having a hard time. I don't know. They dragged me into an office where I continued screaming at the top of my lungs for a half an hour straight. They did not know what to do with me. Somebody sent for Abby, who came in, made everyone leave, and tried to talk to me. They tried to arrange for me to be institutionalized, but Abby was vehemently against it. She begged them not to lock me up and started crying. She had been locked up. She did not want it to happen to me. My mother was called, and when she came in, Abby started yelling at her. Something happened with the insurance company. I think it might have been that they wouldn't cover me coming in unless the police were bringing me in after a threatening incident, but I hadn't threatened or something. I'm not sure. All I know is that I could not get a hold of myself. My mother was cold, aloof, annoyed, short. It made me feel worse. A few days later, I was at the breakfast table with my sister, mother, and grandmother. My mother wasn't talking and not looking at me, of course, so I said out loud that I wanted to kill myself. She said, "Just do it already. Stop talking about it. I'm sick of hearing it." Well, I wanted to smash her into a billion pieces. I remember thinking, I knew it. She doesn't love me. She doesn't care if I die. She used to be so proud of me, smiling at me with love in her eyes. I'm her firstborn child. What happened? I wanted her to say, if you died, I would never recover. Well, I reached down for her milk in a swift movement to dump it in her face like something Alexis Carrington from Dynasty would do. She had been a victim of my anger before, so she quickly tried to block what she thought was going to be a punch with a punch of her own. And the milk went splattering all over both of us. In a burst of adrenaline, I jumped on her and started kicking her as hard as I could. Then I punched her with all of my might, cursing like a demon. I heard my grandmother's cracked voice begging me to get off of my mother. Either my grandmother or my sister grabbed me by the back of my shirt to try to pull me off. My mother was kind of balled up and trying to protect herself. I don't remember any damage she did to me in return, or if she even tried to retaliate. I just knew I had enough anger to break through a brick wall. I could probably have punched a hole right through her. I was acting out of impulse that day, and I now know as an adult what an incorrigible act it is to strike a parent again, no matter the reason. And it is with absolute shame and disgrace that I even tell you guys about this. Sometime shortly thereafter, the cops came and arrested me. My sister says, I remember that fight. It's when things got totally out of control from like then on. I was just frozen watching. You stormed off afterward, and Mom was crying and calling the police on you. I ran to find you. You weren't crying, but you had a lot to say. You were positive Mom hated you, and you were just pissed off. We talked for a long time, and I told you that Mom called the police. You didn't try to run, but you wanted to go and tell her off. I tried to keep you from doing that. My heart was racing. I couldn't believe it escalated to that. I wondered what took things to that point. I didn't know everything. I was barely at home. Well, then the police came and took you away, and it seemed like you were gone for months. It was a living hell that whole time. Back to me. When the cops picked me up, they asked me if I were on cocaine. They revealed that my mother told them I was on it. I said, nope, not on cocaine. They said they would be testing me, so it would be best to admit it. I said, no, I'm truly not on any drugs. They handcuffed me outside of my grandmother's house, the house where I always felt so safe and wonderful as a kid. I always loved going there, and it was sad to have had a scene such as this take place there in front of the wood fence and the birds of paradise bushes, in front of the sidewalk where, with a key, my mother wrote Linda Marie and my uncle wrote Scotty in the wet cement. I sat on my handcuffed hands in the back of the cop car, embarrassed. When we stopped at stoplights, I did not look out the windows. I could just feel people staring at me. Finally, we arrived at some back entrance of a hospital. I was taken into a room where they drew my blood and gave me a urine test. They gave me some orange juice because I was getting a little dizzy. I cooperated with everything they were doing and deliberately acted very calm, just so my mother would look like she was overreacting. I knew not to mess with the police. I was not a complete idiot. They took me to a ward on the second or third floor. It was a psych ward with unbreakable windows and security guards and whatnot. I was assigned to a very passive and soft-spoken shrink with a specialty in eating disorders named Dr. Bernstein. He was not a good match for me because I did not respect him. I found him to be a huge pussy, and I treated him awfully. Sometimes I just sat there for the whole hour and picked at his distasteful couch, while he asked me incessant questions about my fathers and my relationship. I shunned the questions. I always told him, no, nothing happened with my father. I wouldn't even let my mind wander in that direction because it was so disturbing. I pushed away all thought of it, and I was angry when he continued to ask about it. I wanted to talk about the guys I was dating. I wanted to shock him, but he had no change of expression no matter how deranged my stories were. He diagnosed me as manic-depressive and put me on lithium. I felt cool that I got to be on a drug. I couldn't wait to tell Abby. After a week or so, I figured out the ward through some of the girls. They reaffirmed the obvious. I had to act stable. I had to draw pictures of rainbows and sunshine in art therapy. I had to behave. I had to show them they were wasting a space on me, that someone else who was severely troubled and out of control needed my spot. I knew it was crucial that I do the best acting job of my entire life. I had to act like I was normal. It was devastating having my freedom taken away. I couldn't listen to my music. I couldn't get on the phone and call Justin or Abby. Couldn't go watch TV. Couldn't do much of anything that wasn't supervised. Had to eat shitty food, go on dorky supervised outings in a van, take a paper cup of various white pills, and be signed in and out to do everything. I didn't like that my eyebrows were growing together in a unibrow, and that my legs were so hairy we couldn't have razors because we were always on suicide watch. Now a unibrow can really put a bitch over the edge. I felt like killing myself just over that alone. Anyway, I knew I needed to get out of that place and back in school if I did not want to flunk a grade and suffer the humiliation. All of the teenagers in the ward had to march down to a little schoolroom to receive our studies each day. I enjoyed my writing assignments. I loved looking through the books they had available because they had some really crazy erotic novels in there, of which I'm sure they were not even aware. I found them back in the depths of the bookshelves and then curled up and read away, looking studious. I desperately wanted to be out of the ward for Christmas. I wanted to drop-kick my mother for abandoning me in that place, but I had to get out, no matter the cost. I ended up staying only a few weeks, and I was let out a few days before Christmas. My dad called one night and asked to talk to me. When I got on the phone, he said, "I heard you were in a mental hospital." I tried to tell him how awful I felt to even have gotten to that place, but he started laughing at me. "Oh, poor baby," he said in a sarcastic tone. He said his friends were making fun of him for having a mental daughter or a crazy daughter or something like that. I was so hurt I couldn't even react, and I started mentally calculating how long it would take for me to save up 5 Gs. I no longer had the option of fitting in at school, especially after that breakdown. I knew a lot of people in the school smoking section had heard the news of my whereabouts because I received a huge purple card created by Abby and signed by like 50 people. I was embarrassed because it said, "Hope you get out of the loony bin soon," or something like that. So needless to say, I was not going to be getting any dates or making any new best friends anytime soon. Frankly, I was not attracted to the selection of boys anyhow. Actually, no, that's not true. There were 1 or 2 I found attractive, but I knew that I was not normal and I never would be. There was no way I could date like a regular person. The other girls had socially acceptable clothing, standard parents, and knew the rules of how to behave around boys. I had bypassed the innocence of dating, had never had a boyfriend, and had already done everything. I knew I would scare the shit out of some poor boy if I accepted a date with anyone who wasn't tattooed. It was okay with me, though. I did not want to be like the other kids in the school and be into Vanilla Ice, MC Hammer, CNC Music Factory, and Belle Biv DeVoe. The kids stared at me with my straightened purple hair, blue nails, and polka dot outfits. I carved a heart in my ankle and filled it with ink from a pen. I pierced my ears a bunch of times with a needle. Although I had gone through a ton of shit, I still wanted to be a Hollywood chick, but my plans kept failing and I needed to get back on track. I started to make more trips to the record store down the street, and I soon realized that they carried local Hollywood magazines like BAM and Rock City News. Bingo! Those magazines were a gold mine. They were a great window into what was going on down on the Sunset Strip. I saw pictures of tons of people on Sunset Boulevard watching bands play at places like the Roxy, the Whiskey A Go-Go, and Gazzari's. The women were beautiful. Most had really long hair, made-up faces, and wore cool-looking tight dresses. They looked like my Barbie dolls. I couldn't imagine what stores sold clothing like that. I certainly didn't see outfits like that in the stores at the mall. I saw ads for the Hollywood Tropicana, a mud wrestling bar. Those girls had very dark tans, sequined bikinis, teased blonde hair, and silicone breast implants. The guys featured in the magazines were gorgeous. Many of them had beautiful faces solely because of makeup, but that didn't bother me. I saw tattoos, I saw long black hair, skinny legs, and tight black pants. It was like a dream to see that many attractive guys in the same place. They all appeared to be wearing a brand of clothing called lip service. It was made up of crushed velvets and black and purple, and sometimes a hint of burgundy. The main lip service logo was a cross and a skull. They made pants with that logo print and jackets with a big skull in the back. Some of the guys wore floppy velvet hats or t-shirts with the logo. I stared mostly at pictures of a band named Trix, Tryx, and another band called Pretty Boy Floyd. They were local bands who encompassed what I found attractive and hip. I studied their interviews and learned their names, their likes, their influences, and I cut out their pictures and put them on my walls and dreamed of seeing them play live at a show. These guys are obscure. This must be cool. They're not mainstream. I loved Trix because they were creative and they stood out, and maybe because I loved kids' breakfast cereal. They each wore a certain color head to toe. One guy, the singer Jesse Starr, was in red leather with a red stripe in his dyed black hair. Another was in turquoise, Roxy Duveau. Another in purple, Tracy Dawn. And another in pink, Cody Marks. They even had color-coordinated tattoos. I think the pink guy had a Pink Panther, the blue guy had a Smurf, and so on. I couldn't figure out who was the cutest. I read all of their interviews and longed for the day I had a car, so I could go to Hollywood and see them and all the rest. I spent the remainder of the year looking at those magazines every week. I began to learn the names of the popular people. Screaming Boy Mandy from the Glamour Punks, Stevie Rochelle from Tough, Theodore Love from Imagine World Peace, Polly and Sunny from Swingin' Thing, the Miss Gazzari dancers in bikinis with a sash over their implants like Miss America. With each issue, I became more consumed. I had to get there.